Please welcome the mayor of the city of Detroit, Mike Duggan.
All right, so how many people were at my speech last year? Most of you. All right, well, that's good, because this one will be different. And we are evolving as an administration from the first few years, which was get the street lights on, get the grass cut in the parks, get the police to show up, get the buses to run, to now, what kind of a city do we want to be? And is there a vision? And so our progress has been well documented. And you might see all these projects and think, are these a bunch of individual transactions, or is there a coherent vision that's driving this? And I want to talk to you today about that vision. But in order to do that, we've got to go back into our history. Because the way Detroit looks today is directly rooted in planning decisions that the leaders of this community made in the 1940s and the 1950s. That was the last period of growth in Detroit. And those decisions reverberate today, and as I'm going to show you, unfortunately, many of those decisions were rooted in racial discrimination. And when you see the facts, you'll understand what I'm talking about. So as we try to decide what we're doing today, we're in the first period of growth in 50 or 60 years. People moving back. We have a chance to plan growth for the first time in half a century. And so every day we get up and say, what's the vision that's going to drive this? And we have one single guiding principle. For those of you who live or work in the city, those of you who are thinking about living or working in the city, you should know what the future looks like. And our principle is this: it's one city for all of us. That defines our planning strategy. And so we're pursuing an urban redevelopment strategy that hasn't been tried before in the country. And I'm going to show you why we're doing it. But first, we have to go back in time, because urban redevelopment in America has historically, across the country, been about removing the poor. It was conceived as slum clearance. And this picture happens to be from Boston, but it was all across America. It was poor people getting moved out. And in Detroit, you have to go back to what happened before World War II. We were the arsenal of democracy. We like to brag about that. But in the late 1930s, while the country was in a depression, Detroit started to ramp up when Roosevelt did the Lend-Lease for Europe, even before we got into World War II. And people started moving here from the South in even bigger numbers. In 1940, the president of General Motors, William Knudsen, left the company for a greater calling. He became the head of America's wartime effort, right out of Detroit. 200,000 Southerners migrated to Detroit for World War II war production. A lot of African Americans from the South, a whole lot of Caucasians from Kentucky and Tennessee, white and black, came and moved into this city at the same time, and you had at one point 700,000 people working in the plants here. And so, you know what happened? They rapidly expanded the Packard plant, added plant after plant. The engines in the PT boats, the engines in the B-29 bombers were made in Detroit at the Packard plant. It was rapidly expanded for purposes of the war. Housing had to get built quickly, and from 1925 to 1945, 200,000 homes were built in Detroit. They built them all the way to the city border, single-family homes. Couldn't put them up fast enough. No thought to long-term planning. We were trying to win a war. And we were trying to create housing. And so this is an interesting picture that was put out at the time from a group that was trying to deal with the housing problems in Detroit. And each family here represents 10,000 people. And what this shows is between 30 and 40, more people were pouring into Detroit than the expansion of the houses. But once the war effort started as a whole, from 40 to 42, you had 3 times as many people moving in as the housing. But of course, it wasn't equal. The Caucasians coming from the South could live anywhere in the city. But the African Americans were confined to these neighborhoods. And as people poured in, the crowding became enormous in the African American communities. They were going to work every day in the same plant, but living in very different neighborhoods. And in June of 43, people forget this. People remember 1967. But in June of 43, we had racial violence in this city over the housing issue in the middle of World War II. 34 people killed, 433 injured. This happened then when the country should have been pulling together. And so you say, well, how did that happen? What's the problem? And this is the thing that makes you so angry. Much of the problem we had was the direct result of the federal government. Franklin Roosevelt created the Federal Housing Administration because you couldn't get mortgages to buy a house. And so we're going to create an entity that's going to guarantee mortgages for lower income or middle income people. So the FHA sets the standards nationally for home construction. They guarantee the mortgages for the banks so they could increase home ownership. But from the beginning, when the FHA adopted this, they established principles that said mortgages are moving away from minority neighborhoods, 1934. And so the term redlining, who here knows where redlining comes from? Right, you hear it all the time, I'm going to show you. It comes from the FHA. These were the FHA mortgage guidelines. You had green zones. A green zone was a new homogeneous area with American business and professional men. That was best risk. Then you had blue zones. They're still desirable. You had yellow zones that were declining, typically bordering on mixed neighborhoods. And you had red zones that were declining and by and large had minority population. And so the term redlining, this is a map from the federal government of the city of Detroit in 1939. And in the red areas, if you made a mortgage, the federal government would not guarantee it. And so you want to say today, how did all these areas deteriorate? How did this housing go? The truth of the matter is, the roots of the deteriorating housing was here. You could not get a loan to fix up your home in those red areas in the 1930s. And it wasn't like this map was a fluke. These are the underwriting manuals, the actual manual the FHA put out to every bank and mortgage company in America, 1946. Here's your guidance. Incompatible racial groups should not be permitted to live in the same communities. Properties shall continue to be occupied by the same social and racial classes. They wouldn't fund integration, and appraisers, in assessing the appraisal, are instructed to predict the probability of the location being invaded by incompatible racial and social groups. So if you were adjacent to a minority area, your appraisal got downgraded. And so, of course, how did it match up? Not surprising, where the African American population was concentrated was redlining, and one of the most extreme cases up there in 8 Mile, Wyoming, because by the 1940s, they were out to 8 Mile, the last of the farmland in the city of Detroit. And you had a developer who said, there's a mixed neighborhood, a racially mixed neighborhood that built out here. It was a pride of a number of the African American communities, and a developer wanted to build right next door. And they went to the federal government. And the FHA said, we won't make the loan because you're adjacent to a mixed neighborhood. There is no racial homogeneity. Development was dead. Developer said, I got an idea. So the developer came back and said, I'll build a wall, okay? And they said, here's what we'll do. Here's the existing African American neighborhood. We'll build this wall. And the wall doesn't have to be so high it has barbed wire, but we won't make loans to black people on this side of the wall. And the FHA said, great. And they approved the project. And they built the wall. This is 8 Mile and Burwood. They built this wall where the black families lived here, built a new subdivision there. You can see the children in the old neighborhood up against the wall. This is what our federal government did. That wall still exists today. You can go see it. It's half a mile long. Now, the children of Detroit have since painted it with images of civil rights. But that wall still exists in the city of Detroit today. These experiences are very much in the conscience of Detroiters, passed down from generation to generation. In many cases, we have folks who still remember them. And so, in 1945, you had a free press operator, a fellow by the name of Orsil McGee, and he wanted to buy a house over here, outside of the boundaries. And most of these neighborhoods were protected by deeds with restrictive covenants. Said an African American cannot buy in this neighborhood. He sued. Thurgood Marshall took the case to the U.S. Supreme Court in a companion case that the lawyers will remember as Shelley versus Kramer. And in 1948, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down restrictive covenants in this country. That historic marker still sits in front of the McGee's house. That's the McGee family there. for African Americans to move into these neighborhoods, they had to go all the way to the US Supreme Court. This is what's in our city's history. And so, as soon as World War II ended, it seems like America forgot Detroit. The new generation of plants were all built on one level. The old plants were built on 5 or 6 levels. The car would go down the assembly line to the 6th floor, come down a freight elevator to the 5th floor. But the next generation, they wanted to spread out all on one floor. Well, of course, the planners in Detroit, in their haste to build the houses, hadn't left any room for that. And so the old plants closed one at a time. The plant that built those PT boats and B-29s was forgotten. No effort made to save the old plants. New shopping mall, that was Northland. People wanted to be in an area with all this parking. There was no room left in Detroit. That's okay. We'll go out to the suburbs. And the US government accelerated this. I mean, nearly half of all suburban homes in the 50s and 60s had FHA guaranteed mortgages. The suburbs were built with federal government guarantee. And here's the interesting thing, is that the National Commission on Fair Housing showed 98% of all of the FHA-backed mortgages went to Caucasian homebuyers through 1962. So you want to say, how did all those homes in Detroit deteriorate over the years? There was a conscious federal policy that discarded what was left behind and subsidized the move to the suburbs. And so as the black population grew, even once you won the case in Shelley versus Kramer, you struck down restrictive covenants, and the population grew in Detroit. By 1970, half of the population of Detroit was African American, and look how segregated the city still was. This is our history, and it's something we still have to overcome. So, in the 1950s, Detroit's facing a critical shortage, housing. We need to do something with the old factories. What's our urban renewal strategy? We elected a mayor, Albert Coble, for whom Coble Hall is named, who chose a campaign of racial divisiveness. He ran the kind of us versus them campaign that as Detroit's done so much damage. And here was his main promise, that we're going to acquire the land in these backward sections, remove the buildings, and sell the properties back to private developers. With the city built end to end, he was going to take the land in the backward section and give them to private developers. What were the backward sections? The two most intensely populated African American neighborhoods in the city of Detroit. Paradise Valley, which basically ran along where 375 and 75 are now up to Grand Boulevard, and Black Bottom, south of Gratiot, where Lafayette Park is today. Took those areas and said, we're going to turn those over to private developers. At a time people needed a place to go. Well, you had 400 businesses in Paradise Valley, nearly all African American owned. And look, this was Paradise Valley before the announcement, and here's how it looked after they built 375 and wiped out 400 businesses. And went into Black Bottom, where 7,000 families were put out of their homes. And it looked like that when they started, and it looked like that afterwards. And here's the tragic thing. More than 90% of the residents of Black Bottom were tenants. They were renters. Because, of course, they couldn't get mortgages. They were redlined. As tenants, they didn't get any break. They didn't get bought out. The owners of the property got bought out. Many times the owners of the property were not African American. But these 7,000 families were left to go wherever they wanted and just displaced. Many of them migrated over to an African American area over on 12th Street, where violence erupted not too long afterwards. And so Lafayette Park got rebuilt, and the former residents couldn't afford to be there. This is our history. And so when Dr. Martin Luther King gave his first I Have a Dream speech, it was in Detroit at Coble in 1963. And fair housing was a big part of it, because we were at a crossroads in the 50s and 60s. People were starting to move out. We were at a time we needed to act. And you have to look back and you say, okay, I've heard the stories for years, right? Detroit's decline, the violence in 1967, Mayor Coleman Young, that's what drove everybody out. Wayne State issued this report. If current trends continue, Detroit will lose 25% of our population by the end of the decade. You know when they issued that report? March 1963. The seeds of Detroit's decline were rooted in the decisions of the 40s and 50s. And Wayne State recognized it in 1963. But today, that's not kind of the common wisdom. So we said, here's our new thing. What if Detroit had pulled together and said then, one Detroit for all of us, we're going to create space for everybody? How different would Detroit's history? That's the question we're asking. And so now we're at another historic point. For the first time in 50 years, the population is slowing, and I believe is starting to grow. These are the monthly reports that Jerry Anderson and DTE sends me of residential utility hookups. The census data is a year old. This is a month old, and you can see we're seeing growth. Now we have an opportunity to plan for that growth. How are we going to build this city for the next 40 or 50 years? And if we fail again, I don't know if the city can come back. And so you say, well, okay, how does that really relate to Detroit today? You look around the country, and you look at Brooklyn, where nobody 10 years ago could have imagined this, but minorities are being pushed out of Brooklyn in huge numbers with the rapid development. Go over to Washington, D.C., and see what happened. This is the developments going on there. The blue is the African-American concentration of population in Washington, D.C. 20 years ago. And here's how it is today. Look at the number of minorities that have been pushed out by a lack of planning as growth was coming. And so what we are trying to do is say this. Can't happen here, right? Well, we watched this. In 2013, I got a chance to have lunch with a group of seniors. A week later, they had an eviction notice. 127 low-income seniors in downtown Detroit, been in their apartments for 20 years, all got evicted. Why? Because the federal tax credits for low-income housing, and this is the way low-income housing works in this country, it's one of the few things Republicans and Democrats agree on. Rather than building a huge public housing project, the federal government will say, I'll subsidize you the difference between what you could get at the market and what your lower income residents can afford. So if they can afford $600 a month and your market's $900 a month, we'll subsidize $300 a month in tax credits over 30 years. This building, nobody did anything illegal. 30-year tax credits ran out. Owner sold the building. Somebody else bought it. Good day, market rate housing, you guys are out. As if the 127 families who didn't have any legal right to stay, the assumption was they didn't have any moral right to stay. And so they got pushed out. And when you look beyond that and see when they went in and visited their former place, which now looks like that, after they'd been there 20 years, you can imagine the feeling. And the feeling there, was it a fluke? We have 2,200 more units that are going to run out in their federal subsidies between now and 2019, which means what you saw there could happen 2,200 more times. This is a very real concern. And so for people who have grown up in the city and know there's a history of the poor being pushed out when the market provides an opportunity, do we have an obligation as government to step in and do something about it? That's the question we're asking. And the question goes even deeper and more culturally. And so a fellow by the name of Aaron Foley wrote this column a couple of years ago because Cranes had awarded some young people Entrepreneurs of the Year a couple of times, and each time they said, it's great coming to Detroit, it's a blank canvas. And Detroiters listened to that and said, a blank canvas? There's 700,000 of us living here. Okay? We've got rich histories here. We've accomplished a lot here. And so Aaron wrote this column saying we're not a blank canvas, and he got so carried away he wrote a book. So it's called How to Live in Detroit Without Being a Jackass. And he wrote an entire book to say, you're welcome in our city, but you have to be respectful of those who have been here. And a month ago, he appealed to me. I hired Aaron, and he's now writing the stories for the city of Detroit that come back in the neighborhoods. He's got the kind of edge that I want. So I said, okay. I went and hired two nationally prominent people, Maurice Cox, Arthur Jemison. I said, I want a clear vision for urban redevelopment that has not been seen in this country. I want a Detroit vision that says we're going to honor the people who have been here. Can we redevelop our city without wiping out our neighborhoods? And here are the 8 principles that if you are thinking about moving or investing in Detroit, this is what governs our decisions. 1, everybody's welcome in our city. Detroit's a welcoming city. At our core, that's what we believe. Second, we're not going to support development if Detroiters are moved out so other people can move into their homes. We're not going to do it. Radical, but seems fair, doesn't it? Okay? We're going to fight economic segregation. We're not going to have one area of the city for the rich and one area of the city for the poor. If you want to live in Detroit, people of all incomes should be mixed into all neighborhoods. Blight removal is critical, but we're going to save every single house that we can. We want to build neighborhoods of density where your daily needs can be met within walking distance of your home. Those who stayed are going to have a voice in what happens in their neighborhood. It won't just be the government. We're going to move jobs and businesses as close to the neighbors as possible, and the Detroit Riverfront belongs to everybody. Those are our 8 principles. So let me show you how this is going. First principle, I have great partners on Detroit City Council. And one thing we agree on, we're pro-immigration. We support people who moved out of Detroit moving back. We're trying to keep our young talent stay in the city. We invite people from other countries. City Council and I have been completely united on something that's not true in every city. We believe deeply the city is going to be welcome to everybody. Okay. Second, we're not going to move out Detroiters so other people can move in. You say, well, how can you stop that? One, no tax breaks for any development that displaces residents or reduces the number of affordable units. The interesting thing is in Detroit, if you come buy a market rate building and somebody buys it and somebody sells it, the government can't legally do anything about it. But if you buy a building with low-income housing and you want to make it market rate, today, the finances don't work if you don't get tax credits. So the City Council and I have said, we're not giving you tax credits, tax breaks for that. Second, we're going to go after every single one of those 22 HUD-supported units, and I'm going to sit down, and Arthur Jefferson's going to sit down with every single building owner, and we're going to preserve every single one of them. Sounds hard, but we're doing it. And then we're going to establish a housing trust fund to support those owners who stay with us. And you say, okay, is that really going to work? Well, a couple months ago, 165 units on Washington, the Stevens building and the Industry building. Tax credits were expiring, building owner was looking to sell. 165 folks were going to be out on the street, including some of the people that got bumped out of 1214 Griswold. But we sat down with the Roxbury Group, worked out a deal, they bought the building, we gave them some support, and they guaranteed 30 years of affordable housing. We can do this, and we can keep people downtown. We reached an agreement with Rivercrest on East Jefferson. 161 affordable units were going to expire. And we aren't just preserving them. This is the kind of quality that we're building, because affordable units typically are people making under $30,000 or under $40,000 a year. And we're doing this in all areas of the city. I know Dennis Archer's sitting there and he recognizes it because it's right down the street from the Manoogian. We are building these kinds of residences and preserving them in all parts of the city. And so now we've already got agreements in place on all those red squares, 1,200 units, each case, renovating kitchens, renovating bathrooms, renovating the facades with developers who have agreed to preserve them. This can be done if the city values it. And so we are proving to people, you don't have to move Detroiters out. These developers are making money keeping people here. Third principle, we're going to fight economic segregation. It would be so easy in this city to have one area of the city be all wealthy people, another area be all poor people. And you have to work really hard at it every single day. And if you think about the fact that in the middle of this climate, in the middle of people being thrown out on Griswold, in the middle of this sense that things were changing, the voters of Detroit elected me as the mayor. The African American community voted for me. And I can't tell you what an enormous responsibility that feels like, because people believed that I would deal with this fairly. And this is probably something that I care more about. Here's what we adopted, City Council and the mayor together, that if we give financing to any housing development in any neighborhood, a minimum of 20% of the units have to be guaranteed as affordable. And so that means at 80% those earning under $40,000, 60% those earning under $30,000. 20% of your units are going to be set aside for people who are verified to make that income. Now, this sounds like some liberal thing can't possibly work, right? I'm not really much into, yes, see, I hear some of you Republicans out there laughing. But I'm not much into ideas that don't work, so let me just show you what happened. So the Strathmore, a building I know well, when I was the Wayne County prosecutor, I seized it from the dope dealers that were dealing out in front of it. And you can see it's 2 blocks down the street from the Detroit Medical Center. It's what it looked like when I took office. And here's how it looks today. In the heart of Midtown, 40% of the units set aside. Richard Barron, major developer from New York. Okay, Orleans Landing, the first new housing built on the riverfront in years. You can't have affordable housing on the riverfront. 20% of these units are set aside as affordable. People of all incomes can work and live on the waterfront. Ducharme Place in Lafayette Park just opened now. 20% affordable units. And on Friday, the Illiches and their partner announced Detroit's largest housing development in 20 years. If you didn't see this, 4 historic buildings renovated. We believe in saving the buildings we've got. 2 new apartment buildings, 686 units total, $160 million investment. Okay, hottest area in Detroit. 20% of all of the units will be set aside as affordable in the heart of Detroit's hottest development. The fact is, the people who drive your buses, the people who answer your phones, those people who are working in your businesses should be able to live in the same neighborhood as the hockey players and the executives and the like. We should all work, we all work together, we should all live together. And, right? So, this is the old version. These are the old Douglas Towers. You had 900 people concentrated in 6 towers in one place. So how's this working? Instead of, those towers came down 3 years ago, but here's what we've done. I've got 20 separate projects across the downtown and midtown area, 20 separate projects with 1,000 guaranteed affordable units. Instead of being stuck over here in 6 towers with the poor in one place and everybody else somewhere else, we have spread the affordable housing throughout greater downtown and midtown because this is what we believe as a city. Right? And so, if you want to be in an area where people of all incomes, people of all jobs, people of all backgrounds live together, Detroit is a place to go. If you want to be in a different neighborhood, there's lots of choices in southeastern Michigan. And so we're trying to create an option for people who want to live in this manner. Blight removal is critical, but we have to save every house we can. We got a lot of beautiful houses that we lost in the mortgage crisis in 2008 and 2009. And so I've shown you some of these pictures before. You know what we're doing, right? We sue the owners who abandon their houses. We get an agreement from them to fix them up. Or we take title and sell the houses on the internet. And we only demolish those that can't be saved. And now we're adding another piece, which is we're going to board up every house we're not going to be able to get to in the next year or two to secure all of them. And so we go out, we file these lawsuits, entire neighborhood at once. And we want people to fix up their homes. We don't really want to sue them, but if you walked away from your house, we're not going to tolerate it. And so how has it worked? Well, we set up the website, buildingdetroit.org. We auction 3 houses every single day. When I started it off, people thought it was a gimmick. It's now 3 years. So how's it going? So let me show you the last couple days. This is Friday's auction. We sold this house on Navy for $26,000. We sold this house on Hague for $22,000, and this house for Lyndhurst on it for $1,000. We've got houses going at all price ranges for all types of people. That was Friday. Thursday, one house sold for $16,000. One house sold for $12,000. One house sold for $3,000. These are houses that have been vacant for 3 or 4 years. People are moving in and fixing them up. May 17th was a really good day. This house on Lasser sold for $28,000. This house on Granville sold for $7,600. And this house in Boston Edison, that's not a typo. It sold for $240,000. A vacant house in the city's inventory. Because the rest of Boston Edison is coming back so fast, there's value in these homes. The original idea that you had to roll through the city and knock everything down, it's not true. Property values are coming up and people are moving back in. So this is what we've done in 3 years. 3,000 houses that were vacant 3 years ago are occupied today, either rehabbed by the owner or sold by us. Look at that. 3,000 houses have somebody living in them. And so you want to see some pictures? This is always my favorite. So this is Quincy when we sued on it, and that's Quincy today. Okay. Yorkshire when we filed that lawsuit, the same house today. This is what we're doing 3,000 times. People thought Detroit had no future. Look at that one. Can you believe people walked away from these houses? In the Fitzgerald neighborhood, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, here's how it looks today. When you take out the burned out houses on the block, people will buy the other houses. But of course, it does mean taking out the burned out houses. And we're knocking them down at a rate of 4,000 a year, 4 times faster than any other major U.S. city. In fact, the state of Ohio is in second place. They take down 1,000 a year. And so we have all the money we need for the next 2 years to take down the houses because of federal funding effort that Debbie Stabenow helped lead. And Debbie, you'll be really glad to know that the SIGTARP federal audit report that came out in April showed for the last half of last year, Detroit had the lowest cost per house demolition of any major city in America. So we're learning. So Debbie was defending me when our prices were a little higher. But we've gained a great deal of experience. We're now the fastest and the cheapest. But even at $4,000 or $5,000 a year, we still have a lot of work to do. 12,000 houses in the last 3 years. It's staggering what we've done. And here's what happens. It isn't just to knock down. So this was a street on Marygrove. Every one of these houses was beyond saving. We cleared them all out. And you say, well, why did you do that? Well, we just had a house sell in Marygrove in a private sale for $110,000. 3 years ago, that neighborhood, you couldn't give the house away. And now the market is starting to work. So we had 40,000 houses when I started in May. And here's what we've done. 15,000 are resolved, 25,000 to go. And the magnitude, let's think about this. The city of Dearborn has 30,000 houses total. Imagine if every house in Dearborn was abandoned and vacant. That still wouldn't tell you the magnitude of what we're dealing with. But of the 15,000 we took down, 12,000 were demolished, 3,000 got reoccupied. We've got 25,000 left. We can't get to them fast enough. I can't say to people, wait another 5 years. And so in August, we're launching board-up brigades. We're going to go into the neighborhoods we're not going to get to for a year or so on demolition. And we are going to go through and board up every single house. So our plan over the next 2 years is we're going to rehab another 5,000, we're going to demolish another 9,000, and we're going to board up the remaining 11,000 so that 2 years from now, every single vacant house in Detroit is secure one way or another. Principle 5, we got to build neighborhoods of density. If you want to live in a neighborhood with 2,500 square foot colonials and a cul-de-sac, you got lots of good choices in the suburbs. And I lived in the suburbs. Life it's a different life. You need a gallon of milk, you get in your car, you drive up to the strip mall. You want a cup of coffee, you get in your car, you drive up to the Starbucks. It is a different lifestyle. We're not going to compete with the suburbs building duplicate subdivisions. But what if we built neighborhoods where there was so much density that your daily needs can be met within walking distance of your home? And Dave Blaskowitz and the Strategic Neighborhood Fund, with the help of J.P. Morgan Chase and a whole lot of foundations, signed up for this. They said, let's pick some neighborhoods where we renovate and occupy every salvageable house, that we invest in other houses to add on to the density, that we build streetscape improvements to create the walkable community, and then we get businesses to fill them in. Can we build walkable neighborhoods that will be a different experience than you can get in the suburbs? So we targeted these 3 neighborhoods. Many of the foundations lined up $30 million in investment. And we started in the Fitzgerald neighborhood, and if you haven't been following this, it's going to be fascinating to see. So here's Marygrove College over on McNichols. Here's UD Mercy, and here's the Fitzgerald neighborhood in between. In this neighborhood, you've got 600 families still living in houses, 100 vacant houses in good shape, and 300 vacant lots. We said, let's go build a neighborhood of density. Because we've got Marygrove over here, we got a great Bagley neighborhood to the north, and so here's what we've done. We said in the first phase, we're going to take all 115 houses and rehabilitate them. And we've got a contractor who's doing it. We're going to demolish the 16 we can't save. The city owns all the vacant lots. We're going to clear them and actually create a park right in the middle of the area. We are able to do this with $4 million of subsidy. $2.5 million from HUD and $1.5 million from private philanthropy. And then in the second phase, we're going to develop the commercial strip on Livernois, McNichols, and the streetscape. So what does this look like? Could we actually do this? It's happening now. This is the neighborhood. The houses depicted in white are occupied. The houses depicted in blue are going to be renovated. This is the central park that's going to be built into the center of the neighborhood. And this is the walkway that's going to run through the neighborhood. We're taking our vacant lots and turning them into things of beauty, either gardens or flowers and the like. And then we've got the funding already from the extra money you're paying in gas taxes and license fees, and McNichols is going to be improved to look like that. And so we'll build the streetscapes, all right? West Village over near Belle Isle, same kind of thing. So you got a number of housing projects going. This is the second area. This is the way Agnes looked just a couple years ago. This is the commercial corridor today. This isn't a model. This is what's happened. We built a walkable neighborhood with the help of a number of the foundations, Kresge and the like, new housing being built to add density into the area, and we are finding that people are moving in. So we're going to start with those first three, but now we're going to expand to 7 others. And so when people come to us and say, I want to invest in the city, we're prepared to say, we have a place where you can come. And this was one of the meetings at Fitzgerald. We had 40 separate meetings because we're saying to people, if you stayed, you should have a voice in the way your neighborhood's rebuilt. And everything you saw in the Fitzgerald design came out of the 40 meetings with the neighbors who said, I want a park in the middle. I want a bike walkway through my neighborhood. And we are going through neighborhood after neighborhood, and it's a very different kind of planning. The people who stayed plan their future. And we're giving them control of their immediate surroundings. So I've said to them, if you have been taking care of the lot next door, you want to buy the lot next door, you can buy it for $100. In the 4 years before I got here, 200 people bought the side lot next to their house. These are folks from the side lot fairs. They all want to get their picture taken with their deed because they walk in with $100, they walk out with the deed an hour later. And here's what they do with the properties. Okay? They can enlarge the properties. They've been cutting the grass in these houses for years. They put in little gardens. This fella turned it into a neighborhood park with a barbecue. People are taking control of their own neighborhood. 7,000 people have bought side lots in the last 3 years. Those who stayed. And then we're going to bring the jobs as close to the people as we can. The governor has been a great partner on this on every step of the way. And this is Shad Khan, Flex and Gate, the front ends over there. But so Shad is building that. That plant's under construction on I-94 on the east side. Next to that, the Maroons Link plant. They're already working, 150 people. Down here is Sakti. They make parts for Ford cars with 500 people. The old Southwestern High School. Almy, the Lightweight Metal Institute over in Corktown. You've got Andra Rush's operations employing 1,000 people. Makes Ford parts out at Southfield. And GAA just announced their global headquarters of 1,600 people, but they're going to be basing it right there. But you can see what we're doing. We're attracting people closer to the neighborhoods where people live. And then Motor City Match, $500,000 in competition every single quarter. We get 300 to 400 people compete for the 10 folks who manage to win every quarter. $3.4 million in grants. Have leveraged $20 million in new investment. This is philanthropy that has funded these things. 78% have been minority-owned business. And when you couple that with what Dan Gilbert has done in very aggressively recruiting African-American-owned tenants for his buildings, and you look at what Kellogg and J.P. Morgan Chase have done with a $6.5 million entrepreneurial color fund, you look at, these are the 17 businesses that have already opened, and then these are the 20 more under construction, and these are the 56 in the planning process. And look how many of them match up into our planning zone. So you can see what we're doing. We're trying to drive the businesses. We give them extra points if they go into the zones of density where we're creating walkable neighborhoods. We're actually thinking this stuff all through. Right? How about that? Government with a strategy. So, last principle, something Detroit took 300 years to learn. The riverfront belongs to everybody. So we all know Detroit started off on the riverfront as an industrial site. That's the way it looked 10 years ago because of the efforts of everybody connected with the Detroit Riverfront Conservancy. Here's how it looks today. We're starting to reclaim it. And that's the foot of Belle Isle. And Governor Snyder was critical in helping us with that. This is kind of interesting because when I got here, there was a plan to build 2 new waterfront developments that came out almost to the river. And they were in place 10 years ago. They fell through because of the economy in 2008. And these buildings would have come out here, so the wealthy could come all the way out here and have a great view of the water. Our planning departments said, no, we're not doing that. We're going to hold that back and save that for the public. And on the new plans that have just been adopted, the development is pushed back. And the riverfront, now here's the interesting thing. When you do that, and you have development here, development here, development here, and you can layer it back to Jefferson higher and higher by creating all that space for the public, there's actually more demand for developers to build up in a tiered fashion. We think it's going to be even better, and we're going to connect the riverfront all the way to Belle Isle, and then we're going to connect bikeways to the north so that the riverfront becomes accessible to kids in neighborhoods who can get there through protected bikeways, so the riverfront is open to everybody. You can see what we're trying to do. And so there is going to be a lot of conversation in Detroit about equity and inclusiveness. And I want you to understand, this is something we believe deeply in. But everything I've shown you there, business people are making money. And here's the most interesting thing of all. Property values. Here are the home sales prices last year versus the first year I started, so over 3 years. The dark green, the home sale prices have grown more than 50% in the last 3 years. Look how much of the city the home sale prices are up more than 50%. If you listen to the media, you would think everything is in downtown and midtown and nothing's happening in the neighborhood. But in the neighborhoods, they know that the great majority of the neighborhoods have seen home improvements of more than 50% in the property values. What we're doing is working. We got a ways to go. I got to get rid of that red area over there in East English Village. I'm on it. I hear from those neighbors all the time, and we'll get there. And last week we had a house in East English Village sell for $200,000. So next year I'm going to stand here, and hopefully that's going to be better. So one last thought when you think about how far we've come. Last year, SEMCOG showed something you hadn't seen very often. 1,000 new homes in Detroit, double the next highest city. But think about this. With the announcement the Ilitch has made, one project in a 6-block area, 686 units, that one project would be bigger than any other city in Michigan, at least in southeastern Michigan. And so we're heading the right direction. For those of you who are thinking about joining us, if you believe in rebuilding a city where everybody is valued, those who stayed are respected and protected, and you build on, we'd love to have you come join us, because as the astronaut found the difference in Detroit from 3 years ago, you can even see from outer space. Thank you all very much.
Joining Mayor Duggan on stage, please welcome the host of WJR NewsTalk 760 AM, Paul W. Smith.
Thank you. Sorry, I cut into your time.
No, yeah, I'm not worried about that. Look at this, standing ovation. Very nice. Hello, Mr. Lepp. I'll tell you what we've just seen and experienced is something that a lot of us didn't know. We've heard so many times about the city, everything's happening in the city of Detroit. What about the neighborhoods? By the way, I've been calling the city of Detroit one of our neighborhoods, because it is. You can't find an apartment now, it's so good, and there's so many more to be built by the Ilitches and others. So that city's doing well, but now we see that all the cities are doing well. But we've also noticed something that's one of the pillars that Sandy, Tammy, Wendy, and Beverly back there, the people I worked with, and by the way, haven't they done a nice job here for the chamber? I mean, just an incredible job. one of the pillars is restoring civility in American politics. You don't hear this enough, but we do hear it in Detroit and the state of Michigan. The mayor of the biggest city in the state thanking the governor of the state and saying how they've worked well together. And I hope that this is a sign to other politicians who will understand that when they work together, more gets done. And when it gets done, it's getting done for us. So I salute you, Governor and Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
I also want to point out some very good news for Mayor Mike Duggan, for the city of Detroit, for the state of Michigan. This news was released today from Christine Ferretti of the Detroit News. The city of Detroit ended the 2016 fiscal year with a $63 million surplus. $63 million. That is the second consecutive balanced budget out of bankruptcy. This is going to help us, I would assume, with a better bond market standing and a path out of financial oversight.
Right. I think that's the key point. And we're putting a significant amount of that into the pension fund to make sure that the money's there for our retirees. But our next fiscal year ends this June 30th. If we finish this next year with a balanced budget, we are out of state oversight. For all those people who said once Detroit's out of bankruptcy, they'll go right back to the same patterns. What you've seen out of this mayor and this council is a financially responsible organization, and I know the governor is going to be as happy as I am when state oversight to the city of Detroit ends.
There are a couple of issues that I think most people are in agreement on, major issues, if you will. And these can derail all of the good work you're doing, Mr. Mayor, and the people that are bringing business and money and investing in the city of Detroit. And I'm wondering if it's frustrating to you that these are two issues, frankly, that you can't really be hands-on about. We've got a great police chief in James Craig, but we've got a great crime problem in the city. And if it isn't a real problem, it's certainly the perception of a real problem of crime. If we can't get that in order and fix our schools, it won't matter about all these other great things that are happening. In the end, that could be our demise. Let's talk about that a little.
Well, if you were to talk to Detroiters, they would put car insurance as above those two issues as things that are driving people out of the city. But Chief Craig is doing a great job. We're adding 30 police officers every single month coming out of the academy. We've got the budget for 300 more officers than we have today. You don't want to put 300 cops on the street at the same time. You have other issues. But 30 a month, every single month, is giving the chief the resources he needs. The Green Light project, we've now got 160 businesses covered by Green Light. The violence is down in every one of those areas. And so we got a lot of work to do. The city's much too violent, but I don't accept the principle that it's out of our control. I think we're pursuing strategies. And, I can give you stats. Violent crime's down 7% this year. Well, if you see 3 shootings on TV, you don't care what the stats say. The city's too violent, and the chief knows that. And of course, on schools, a year ago, we had the solution. We couldn't get it through the legislature. I'm right? Thank you. Somebody's with me. But,
what was the solution we had?
The solution was the Detroit Education Commission that, all right? And the governor ran into this issue where his person said they were going to close 25 schools in the city of Detroit. I called them up and I said, show me the empty seats in the other quality schools we're going to move these children to. And he did the right thing in backing off. But of course, the whole notion of a Detroit Education Commission is that we would grow quality schools, both DPS and charter, in the city. So if you had failing schools, you first create quality schools to move the children into, and we need to come back at that.
But why have we had this history? I remember when, was it Robert Thompson sold his company, wanted to give $100 million to the Detroit Public Schools, and we had a governor who said, no, we're not going to accept that money, because he wanted to have proof that the money was being used properly, invested properly in the schools. Why do we have a history of that?
So Bob Thompson's university prep schools are some of the highest performing charter schools in the city of Detroit. And
he tried to give that $100 million to the city public schools.
But he has open schools, and he's running many quality schools. The problem is when you have 100 charter schools and 100 DPS schools, and most of the charter and most of the DPS are not performing at acceptable levels, you have the situation we have today, which is 30,000 children got up today and went to school outside the city of Detroit, which means that the parents of Detroit don't believe there's enough quality DPS choices, they don't believe there's enough quality charter choices, and we need to expand both. And I'm optimistic that the new superintendent of DPS is going to get that organization going the right direction. I think it's critical he keep Alicia Merriweather around, who's done a remarkable job.
And he, thank God he has said he is, Nikolai Viti has said that he in fact has offered her a top job in his
I think the two of them would make an excellent team, but we need to come back at it, and I hope before the end of the year we get a chance to come back at it, because you're right, families with school-age children are still leaving the city.
Well, speaking of leaving the city, I have to tell you, we recently found that we had a net loss in residents of the city again. Call me crazy, but I honestly thought that was stopped. I thought actually, I know this sounds foolish, I actually thought we'd start to see some plus numbers now, just by everything that's happening in the city, all of the millennials moving in, how hard it is to get an apartment in the city. Were you a little bit surprised those numbers still went down?
I think the numbers were accurate. Of course, it was the smallest drop in 60 years. The DTE, they're a year old now, and the DTE numbers suggest we're growing at this point. But one of the things that we are seeing happening is parents with 2 and 3 children are moving out, and 1 and 2 member families are moving into those houses. So we have more occupied units, which is a step. We need to make the city attractive to families with children to move the population.
We do indeed. The millennials are going to be having kids. They're going to need the schools. They're going to want to feel safe.
And we want everybody to stay. And it's not just the millennials. There's a whole lot of other families with kids.
Sure, absolutely.
Who have left the city already, and it's something we got to get to.
What's the most frustrating part of your job?
You know, I really don't get frustrated. Now, my staff probably doesn't feel that way. But you know, there was a period of time there where we couldn't hit the damn ambulance response time numbers. We couldn't get the parks cut on time. And it wasn't a lot of fun working for me that first year. Now I think the management team is just doing a phenomenal job, and they're delivering service in a really special way. And when I can go to a guy who has cut all 275 parks, Brad Dick, and say to him, look, I need you to board up 12,000 houses in the next 2 years, and he comes back a month later with a whole plan and starts hiring people, you say, we've hit a different level. I really think I've got great people working for the city of Detroit today, and I think they're really committed to what they're doing.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mayor Mike Duggan, doing a great job for the city of Detroit.
Thank you.
Thank you.